The kind of discussions that happen at this conference really opens your eyes to a lot of innovations that are presently happening in our country in the financial inclusion space. I think it's a wonderful occasion for all of us to come together.
Hi, it's great to be here at the Inclusive India Summit 2019 in actually bringing big drive into financial inclusion in India.
The kind of discussions that happen at this conference really opens your eyes to a lot of innovations that are presently happening in our country in the financial inclusion space. I think it's a wonderful occasion for all of us to come together.
Hi, it's great to be here at the Inclusive India Summit 2019 in actually bringing big drive into financial inclusion in India.
discussions that happen at this conference really opens your eyes to a lot of innovations that are presently happening in our country in the financial inclusion space. I think it's a wonderful occasion for all of us to come together.
Hi, it's great to be here at the Inclusive India Summit 2019 in actually bringing big drive into financial inclusion in India.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar being organized by Axis as part of the Inclusive Finance India webinar series. This webinar is being organized in partnership with our long-term technical partner, Axion, a well-known global non-profit working in the area of financial inclusion. In the wake of the pandemic, a large number of new consumers have switched to digital and contactless payments since they provide a safe and hygienic alternative to cash. The latest FIS Pace Pulse survey that was recently concluded in September found that India has seen a surge in digital payments, with 68% of Indians now using online and mobile banking to conduct financial transactions. While the large retail and wholesale businesses had a way to cater to the increasing demand for contactless transactions, the small players in the ecosystem have been facing challenges. The digital transformation for small businesses, particularly in smaller towns, has to be driven by strong use cases, appropriate incentives, and a facilitative ecosystem. While recently, many private sector players have expressed a strong interest in pursuing the agenda of digital transformation of small businesses, it's not too clear how they will engage with each other for ensuring a seamless transformation for them. Through this webinar, Pathways for Digital Transformation of Small Businesses by Strengthening Digital Financial Services, a group of eminent panelists will deliberate on the need for partnerships and collaborations for facilitating the expansion of financial, information and communications technology to offer safe, reliable and low-cost provision of digital financial services across the country. We have an excellent speaker lineup comprising of philanthropic investor, market enabler, payment bank and a commercial bank. It's my privilege to introduce the panelists: Alison Eskason, Vice President, Center for Inclusive Growth, Mastercard; Anshul Swami, Executive Vice President and Head, Retail, Inclusion and Rural Products at the RBL Bank; Lalit Bhise, Chief Executive Officer of Bizom; and Raman Taneja, Head, Digital Banking Products at the Jio Payments Bank. The panel will be moderated by Prateek Srivastava, Vice President, Digital Advisory Solutions, Global Advisory Solutions at Axion. We are grateful to the speakers for agreeing to our request to join this discussion today. I'm positive that we'll be able to take away some concrete forward-looking action points for future. Welcome again, and I now hand over the session to Prateek to take this forward. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this panel, and do want to thank Access and Access Assist and to actually host this webinar to talk about something extremely important and topical. And I'm joined by an esteemed group of people who you'll hear from in a few minutes. about each of them have actually really done a lot of great work in the entire industry to push the conversation, but also action forward. So we welcome you to this conversation. It's going to be hopefully quite stimulating, and we'll have some poll questions along the way so that you can share your views and also do share questions and the rest. So in terms of the format of this presentation, very quickly, and this discussion, which is extremely important, we'll have the panelists talk through and share about each of them. And then we'll move to them introducing their businesses a little bit and what they're doing. And then we'll go into a bit more detail about the conversation at hand, which is, how do we work together to actually use digital transformation to drive the digital economy in an interesting way forward and bring the economy in whichever way possible back to life and recover. So I'm joined by Lalit Desai, who's actually the CEO and co-founder of Bizom, Anshul Swami, who's actually working, known him for a while, RBL Bank, and they're doing extremely great work. And also joined by Alison Eskison, who's with the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, and Raman Taneja, who's the head of Jio Payments Bank as well. Just was wondering, actually, in terms of keeping it flowing, I was wondering if each one of you could quickly say hello, just to test that the connections are working well, and maybe a sentence or two about yourselves before we get into about the organization. So Lalit, could you start?
Sure. So hi everyone, my name is Lalit. As Pradeep mentioned, I'm a CEO co-founder of Bizom. I have been a lifetime techie. I've been coding for 21 years, so that's my heart. But obviously, as a businessman, I have to stay away from my passion a little bit and look at the business. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Lalit being humble, but he's done an amazing job, which is great. Anshul, maybe if I could welcome you.
Hi, my name is Anshul. I've been with RBL Bank for 9 years. Like Prateek said, we've been working very closely with Access as well as Axion in trying to ensure what we can do in the ecosystem with respect to inclusive growth, both in the microfinance space as well as the MSME space.
Thank you very much, Anshul, for that. May I welcome Alison.
Hi, my name is Alison Eskison, and I'm based in Singapore, and I run the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth in Asia Pacific. And it's a pleasure being here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much, Alison. And it's getting late for you there, which is great that you could join as well. Raman, could you say hello?
Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm myself, Raman Taneja. I'm part of Jio Payments Bank. I take care of banking products there. I believe in power of technology, and I'm a true believer of digital transformation for financial services.
This is a privilege to have Raman also joining from his hectic schedule. He pulled out, as everybody did, but he went the extra mile to just make sure that he's able to join. So thank you for joining us, Raman, as well. So, my name is Prateek Srivastava. I work with Axion for a number of years now, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. So most of this part of the world is waking up. So I'm looking forward to this conversation as well. But to set the scene a little bit, I thought we could just talk through a little bit about what we are facing right now in the universe. There is a huge problem. Everybody's living through it for a number of months now. Is the new normal really ever going to be normal is a question to ask. So when you think about it, they started it arguably November, December in 2019 in China. And then, from there, things move forward in different ways. It's, it's almost surreal how things moved. And now we are here where we are. So the impact is, is people working from home, having these kind of conversations, being in 2D rather than 3D with colleagues. But actually in the real economy, where people on the streets, things have shut down, as we all know. We have lockdowns, problems, challenges, etc. The biggest impact is felt broadly by the micro businesses who are informal, and formal, but also micro manufacturers, producers who produce small things, but also retailers, schools, teachers, education sort of providers, workers, skilled and unskilled. It is very, very tricky. The focus of this conversation is micro business. MSME, micro business, micro enterprise, micro merchants. We're using the term micro business generically to talk about that segment. And typically we're focusing on the underserved anyway, and they're feeling the pain even greater. And some statistics the team put together a few weeks back was, 42% at a global level, not just a global level, MSMEs are at risk of failure. It's ridiculous in the next 6 months. What does that mean? It means people have to shut shop. They have no footfall, no businesses. The businesses can't run. If they're producing something, it's sitting on the shelves. If they're producing something, they can't deliver it because the transportation is not available. Having said that, evidence from, again, China and other parts, India as well, is that you have the ability to leverage if there is an ability to leverage digital tools, then that actually makes it possible for the MSMEs or micro businesses to actually position themselves with some strength, if you like. And there's an opportunity. So we're here not to necessarily reflect on, yes, definitely touch upon the problem, but let's figure out how to come out of this. And a little bit about Axion before I hand over to my esteemed panel. Very quickly, we are a global nonprofit. We work since 1961. We've been around, and we are working in doing one thing only, which is economic development through financial inclusion, specifically focused on the micro businesses. We are privileged to be supported by a number of fantastic institutions, not the least of which being Mastercard, Center for Inclusive Growth, where we're doing a lot of interesting work around digital transformation. Quick sample of projects where we're live. I'll just move on. You'll see some familiar names, but quickly, I want to touch upon this topic. The way we see the potential for economic sort of recovery is a simple sketch, but it may be quite interesting. So if you look at a digital sort of, to digitally transform a micro business or MSME, is it sufficient to provide just a phone with an app or phone with just an app? Maybe not. Or is it enough to actually give them a training to use that app? Maybe that is good. Definitely, it's a step better than download the app and you're on your own. We feel that, microfinance institutions, small banks, payment banks, the small finance banks as well, NBFCs, payment companies definitely are doing a lot. So there is sort of the financial side of things moving, but somehow they're disconnected. So we're wondering about how we can actually take an ecosystem view to actually surround the micro business with a couple of things. So the logic being, if you are actually given an app, or if you're able to download an app, if you can check your balance, or make a payment, or go to an agent or business correspondent and hand over 1,000 rupees, and that sort of gets uploaded onto your wallet, that's great. But how do we, is there a way to use digital to connect them to a new business opportunity, to connect them to more than just a financial transaction, to actually bridge them into, by the way, yesterday you had a shuttered shop. Now here is a way of moving forward. So we thought that we bring it all together and we say, look, how about thinking in a different way? Maybe what we do is we work with a financial service provider, could be any type, a mechanism by which you can convert cash to digital and vice versa, being a cash in, cash out point, or indeed a cash in transaction from Social Security, from the social aid payments from the government, or salary, etc., onto a phone so they can actually see it. And by the way, also build capacity, give little videos or tips that how to use this. And in order for them to be interested, because they're looking for the next meal or the next sort of income approach, connect them to a platform that allows them to sell online, buy online, be able to sell, into a manufacturing sort of mechanism, like a supply chain, or connect to some sort of a delivery sort of orders, because a number of countries, things for delivery to home has become the norm. So can you connect them to a courier service or something like that? So you can economically active sort of platform that enables them to rethink and rebuild, but then now let's work to actually help provide training to use that opportunity, not just the financial service itself. So imagine that a micro business is able to use their phone to place an order for their inventory that they want to buy, and on their app, and be able to confirm that with their supplier. And at that point, a financial service provider who's connected to the same ecosystem can use that confirmation and that data and the KYC, of course, knows to be accepted, actually offer a just-in-time finance product and say, here is, or the transaction you just made of 10,000 rupees, would you like to access working capital? If yes, click here. And then, let's say I'm doing that, I say, okay, I'm interested in finding out more, I click there. Then we can figure out the operations of how all that happens. But it's instant access to credit. And now what's happened is you actually created a purposeful use of that finance instantly, and you're able to actually inject liquidity when it is needed. So it's not like I have to sit and plan 3 months ahead. I can actually take sachet-sized loans whenever I need it, or access insurance. So take it a bit further. I actually say, okay, maybe access the working capital. Now, the financial service provider pays the supplier on my behalf. Now, the next step is, well, whenever that confirmation comes through, the delivery of those goods will be, let's say, we agree that it's going to be in 3 days. An insurance company can provide 3 hours of transportation insurance from that supplier to me. So what you're doing is you're coming up with bite-sized insurance as we move forward, etc. So what's happening now is, in this scenario, is you're actually buying quick, instantly, getting access to very affordable bite-sized products, and you're able to revive just a little bit of my economy, and then we build it up as we go. Now, another example is, in this scenario, I've got my inputs, and I can now produce something. Where do I sell it? Now let's connect it to a platform. Can we sell online? And we actually, at Axion globally, we're trying out a few different things with some platforms to see whether we can connect FSPs, financial service providers, to platforms. So this is how we see the world, perhaps coming together. It is easier said than done. But now I will, theory and some practice to one side, some practical experience to one side. I'd love to bring in the people who can happily make it happen, if you like. So with that, I'd love to introduce Bizom and Lalit, sir. Could you please, I can move the slides for you. I'd love to welcome you, because you're in the thick of this.
No, absolutely. I mean, so while you were speaking, Prateek, I could see how the visions are similar, and in terms of what we are doing and how we are experiencing some of the things that you spoke about. I think you can go to the next slide if there is, right? So a bit about Bizom. Bizom, as we call it, is the retail intelligence platform, primarily aimed towards mom and pop stores, what we call kiranas in India, and connecting them to large brands, so to say, helping them to digitize, helping them to optimize, and helping them to expand their business. The next slide, if you can. So I'm going to keep it fairly brief. I mean, from the audience's point of view, just to give you a overview of what Bizom does, right? So one of the things that we took about in emerging markets, and when we look at micro SMEs, the largest segment of micro SMEs is actually these mom and pop stores. For example, in India, by any estimate, there are anything between 15 to 30 million of these mom and pop stores, which drive 90% of retail in India, right? And these guys are digitally non-connected as far as the whole ecosystem is concerned, at least traditionally being digitally non-connected. We took it upon us to digitally connect them. But when you make them digitally empowered, what we quickly realized was that they don't exist in silos. There is a whole supply chain which powers that whole ecosystem. So you cannot digitalize retailers, or we cannot empower retailers just by doing digitalization of them in silos. You need to also do the supply chain part, which is where the distributors, wholesalers, mini distributors, in emerging market, there are multi-tier supply chains which essentially go to retailers. So digitalizing their particular work processes day in life is important. And at the end of that particular ecosystem, the big guys who are investing in that ecosystem are these CPG or consumer brands in general, right? So we need to get that whole ecosystem from brands to distributors to wholesalers and down to the retailers digitalized. Now, this particular process gives us access to huge amount of data or insight in terms of what's happening in the market. To put it very mildly, we know what Indians eat, what or other in the markets that we are present in, including India, part of Africa, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. What people eat, what they drink, what they use for their home cleaning and other requirements. Now, using all that data and insights, we help these brands and distributors to optimize their operations in terms of making those inventory turns faster and so on and so forth. And also we help them to expand so be able to tell the brands what to sell, where to sell, at what price, to get that maximum reach to consumers, so that the consumers can access their products where they want to access those products, right? We are fairly weak as far as traction is concerned. We work with about 500 plus CPG brands right now in all of these markets. Through them, about 150,000 odd distributors and wholesalers, the supply chain workers, and we connect about 7 million odd unique mom and pop stores across those geographies. So it's a fairly large ecosystem that we currently kind of empower. Obviously, the digitalization rate, and one of the things that Prateek mentioned, just to bring it up here, COVID has been in a way a transformational moment also for us, because this mom and pop ecosystem was not as conducive to digitalization. Sometimes it was fear of sharing data, sometimes it was unawareness, sometimes it was not just a priority for them to get digitalized. One of the things that COVID has done for us is essentially put that priority, make it as a priority for those shopkeepers to essentially start using digital technologies to order their goods, to maintain their inventory, to keep their shop spaces clean, and even to connect to consumers in general, right? And that's something that has helped us a lot. The retail adoption itself has grown up almost by 10x in last 6 months alone. So that's been a phenomenal uptick that we have seen in general in our business. If you could go to the next slide, Prateek. Right. But from this conversation point of view, we did not want to just talk about the whole what Bizom does in terms of what insights they bring. It is mainly about figuring out how it is helping the whole SME space, especially in a mom and pop kirana kind of an ecosystem. And as I mentioned, mom and pop kiranas actually form the largest segment of MSMEs in India, at least, and in other emerging markets that we work with, like Tanzania or Nigeria or Kenya or Myanmar or Vietnam and so on and so forth. And they all of them share these common problems, right? Some of the times the geographies are so widely spread that the traditional distributors may not be able to reach them because their unit value economics don't match. So you need to aggregate that demand. You need to have an ability to aggregate that particular demand. The shopkeepers themselves, being a micro SMEs, they have limited capital and limited real estate. They need to make maximum use of their limited real estate and limited capital. The only way they can do it is if they have an ability to order goods just in time. Otherwise, they can only keep limited lines, and their turns are pretty limited. I mean, if you look at a retailer's business, it's like a trading business. His absolute take home depends a lot on the number of turns the shopkeeper makes in a month, rather than the absolute margin. So fast-moving SKU kept in lesser quantities is what makes maximum money for a shopkeeper. And then how do you enable that? That's one of his biggest problems. And obviously, the whole in Indian context, I don't know how much of our audience is Hindi speaking, but in Hindi we call it as a Pachvi Pass compliance. Right? This ecosystem is not very well educated. They are semi-educated, semi-literate, so to say. And you need to make things which are simple enough for even for a 6-year-old to understand. So for them, they have this fear of adopting to technology. Part of that fear also comes from not being very conversant with complex technology tools, right? So they are all grown up on tools like WhatsApp and TikTok. And somebody who's used to using WhatsApp and TikTok, how do you get them to use a more comprehensive technology tool? Are typically the problems that we were faced with when we were looking at some of these ecosystem to get them digitally empowered, digitally enabled, and bring them in a part of a mainstream financial ecosystem, right? If you could move to the next slide, Pratik. So what we did with this whole digitalization with Bizom is essentially we said, okay, look, we need to form a consortium. And it's quite similar thought that Pratik mentioned some time back. He said we can't do it alone ourselves. What we can do as a tech or digital company is obviously provide the world-class tech or simple enough user experience from a shopkeeper's point of view to digital empower them. We can build a whole tool chain across the ecosystem to connect all of these disparate fragmented points in the ecosystem. But we also need to take a leadership position in terms of building that ecosystem. So what do I mean by ecosystem? Our ecosystem or our collaborative approach, one of the most important part of that collaborative approach are these individual entrepreneurs in emerging economies, these distributors or wholesalers who have been already doing business in that particular ecosystem. How can we empower them to become multi-brand? Or how can we empower them to become a digital distributor, so to say, so they can handle this just-in-time demand from a unit value economics point of view. So if a legacy distributor who's distributing 1 brand, 2 brands, 7 brands, how can I make that particular person to handle 150 or a 500 brand kind of ecosystem? So that's one part of that ecosystem, these individual entrepreneurs. Other very important part of the ecosystems are the consumer brands themselves. As I mentioned, these are the big boys in the ecosystem. They have created that consumer recollect in terms of getting those consumers on board. How do we now get them in the part of ecosystem to get these distributors in place? The third very important part of that particular ecosystem, and I think we will talk about it during this conversation, is the finance companies. Because a lot of this information, insights that's flowing through the platform, we actually have an alternate sales source of data to say, so to say, a credit rating of a retailer in terms of saying, how much a credit worthy a particular retailer is. What does a distributor see in that retailer, which maybe a bank or a financial institute is not able to see? And how can we make this financial institute see that? Right? Media companies is another part of the ecosystem. So these ecosystems combined together, then we are able to help these SME businesses to get more turns through just-in-time delivery, discovering multiple lines or procuring multiple lines, getting better benefits from brands, or directly getting benefits from brands instead of depending on intermediaries in general, and getting credit access to simple access to credit and simple access to visibility and other drives in general, right? So that's in a nutshell what we do and how we look at this particular ecosystem. Obviously, I'm looking forward to learn more as we go along in this conversation. So thanks.
Lalit, thank you so much. I think you've brought it all together in one place, which is really good. I'd like to welcome a quick poll, if possible, before we move to Jio. I don't know if Access, the team, can actually put up the first question, being, what are the barriers to, digital adoption? If that's possible to put up, please confirm if you can. If not, we can move. And most of you probably are mute in the background, so I don't know if Arya or somebody can confirm.
Yes, we are doing it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So good evening, everyone. We can move to the next slide. Hi, good evening, everyone. I take care of banking products in Jio Payments Bank. So Pratik has mentioned about digital economy. Lalit has also mentioned about the digital economy. I'll also be covering on the ecosystem approach, how we are building the overall approach while targeting consumer. We talk about consumer segment, we talk about merchant segment. Consumer, we call it as on the demand side, and the merchant, we call it on the supply side. So we are working with our ecosystem companies within the Reliance Group, where we work with telco, we work with Reliance Retail to ensure that we are able to provide an integrated experience to the consumers. Some of the work which we have done on the demand side is that we have enabled some of the basic use cases on my Jio app as well as on Jio phone. So the whole idea here is that how do we basically target both digital as well as the new customers who are going to be digital in the near future. So we are providing infrastructures. The customers can go to a nearest banking outlet and he can start doing transactions. In case if he's a Jio phone customer, he can access basic banking services once again on the Jio phone. My Jio again for a digital banking customer, where he can access features like UPI, he can transact through the Jio Payments Bank account, he can make merchant payments, and other acceptance what we have enabled over a period of time. So one of the things we are also working on is that how do we reward consumers as when they do transactions. A lot of promotions we do as a part of our encouraging consumers to use more and more digital adoption, that we do that. And one of the barrier which we have always felt that why not to provide banking services at zero cost. So that's the feature that we have enabled for the customers. All the transactions which we have offered to the consumer comes at a zero cost. This is on the consumer side, we call it as the demand side. On the supply side, we work very closely with the kirana merchants. Some of the challenges that we have seen when we were doing a project with the kirana merchants is that to provide easy to use payment acceptance infrastructure. So as a part of the offering, so what we do that we provide them in terms of partnership, an acceptance machine through which he can accept all the day-to-day payment needs. So once it is done that, as Pratik was also mentioning, that the moment he is able to receive, I'll say the sale in terms of purchase, I'll say sale in terms of digital means of getting money back to his account. So he also needs a method by which the money which he has collected as a part of the sale in the digital format needs to go back to the principals. Principal, when I refer, these are the distributors, these are the wholesalers, and these are the actual FMCG companies where the money can go back as a part of their purchase services, but as and when kirana merchant purchases services from all the distributors and wholesaler. So one of while we were doing the entire project, one of the challenge we have also seen, how do we onboard merchants. We have seen that customers, they have very limited documents. So we ensured that as a part of our onboarding process, all the documents have been collected, and we have made it very simpler for merchant also to understand whatever the documents we collect as a part of the onboarding process. They understand the entire process, and we do not go back to merchant again and again as a part of the process. So this has basically, and we have received a lot of feedback from the merchant that the onboarding process is quite simpler and easy to understand. The moment customer is onboarded, all the enablement in terms of access to acceptance to accessing his account on self-service app, which is My Jio, is enabled on an instant basis. So the whole premises behind working with the merchant, as we all agree that financial services, the banking service or the payment services, they have to follow commerce somewhere, which means that if we are able to solve pain points for the merchants and their commerce needs through providing a frictionless banking as well as the payment services, we'll be able to retain this customer for a longer duration. To enable all the technology stack, we work with many partners at the background. Of course, Aadhaar stack we use, and a lot of validation APIs in terms of what is the public good infrastructure which is available, enabled as a social good. We use that, which is to validate all the credentials, all the documents on an online basis, real-time basis. We do that. And as a part of our onboarding process, a transaction process, especially on the onboarding part, we use a lot of AI and the computer vision programs also. Some of the reading of the documents also happen through a machine-based learning, which basically makes a job easier for the person who goes to the merchant for onboarding.
Thank you, Raman, for sharing this. I mean, Jio is doing so much in this space, and it's uniquely positioned to really push the agenda forward. A number of questions do come up, but I'd like to sort of maybe move forward and welcome Alison, if she could share some of her thoughts, and come back to you, Raman, because what you've just talked about is very, very, very powerful.
Great, thank you so much. Well, let me start by saying I have a unique perspective because I represent the philanthropic side of the company, but I could not agree more with how Lalit laid out the ecosystem in terms of Kirana's distributors, as well as the FMCG companies and brands that sort of sit behind them. And then similarly, wholeheartedly agree with Raman that there's this whole financial services and payment side and the ecosystem around that. And I think one of the things that we think about at Mastercard, and particularly at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, is how do you bring those two together? Because we think that's when you really unlock this incredible power and this transformation of the ecosystem. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about the Center for Inclusive Growth, because we are distinct from the company, although we reside inside of it. And I'm giving you this information just so when I go into the next slide around talking a little bit more about the ecosystem and how we think about things, and maybe a couple examples to show how we can pull things together, or how we have pulled things together, it becomes a little bit more clear. So the Center for Inclusive Growth sits between the Mastercard Foundation, which is humongous and operates solely in Africa, and Mastercard, the company. And so we take the philanthropic investment, but perhaps more important, all of the Mastercard assets, the data, our technology, our expertise, our brand, our customers, and really look at how can we leverage all of those assets to drive economic growth that is inclusive and equitable. And we do that by making philanthropic investments in research, in programs, as well as in convenings. And so that really falls into insights, impact, and influence. And the idea is that economic growth is this macro challenge. And if we really want to move the needle, we do have to think about how do we bring others with us, and how do we think about that ecosystem. So the two pieces that I would really add to the ecosystem Lalit described and the ecosystem that Raman described are civil society, the NGO community, and the unique role that they have and the trust that they have in communities, and how valuable that can be in both influencing and educating, but also in driving behavior and measuring the impact of that behavior. I think the other stakeholder who were not mentioned in either of those two slide decks were academics. One of the things that we believe strongly is that there is substantial, meaningful academic work that can point a way forward, and that we need to be more committed to building on actual learnings and to open ourselves up to criticism and to those learnings ourselves. And so incorporating randomized control trials into the types of programs that we're running, so that we both can contribute to the knowledge base, but also take away from that as well. I'll go to the next slide. Oh, so there's a few things that I wanted to share about what the company does, and I'll go through these quickly, mostly because I think it's interesting in how Mastercard has positioned itself as well as the Center for Inclusive Growth, and it points to how we are really trying to sit between these two ecosystems that Lalit and Raman had outlined. So first, we're committed to bringing a total of 1 billion people into the digital economy by 2025. We've already exceeded the 500 million mark, and so we continue to push ourselves further. And this is a commitment that certainly the Center for Inclusive Growth holds true, but it's actually a commitment that is driven by our business. We will also bring in a total of 50 million micro and small businesses into the digital economy. Then the next one. And to provide 25 million women entrepreneurs with solutions that help them to succeed in the digital economy. And I guess one additional stakeholder that I hadn't mentioned, but I'll come back to, is the important role that donors can play in all of this. So you have the business ecosystem and the FMCG ecosystem that Lalit pointed out. You certainly have the financial services ecosystem, but civil society, academics, as well as donors can help to stitch some of those pieces together. And we have found historically that that's where we see the most meaningful and sustained change and the most impactful programs. And I think the one part that is important is when you think about doing a program that you really have an eye to scale and you understand what that pathway is, because doing success in a controlled environment is wonderful, but if you can't actually make it work in the real world, you fall short. And we think that that's actually the power that both the ecosystems that Lalit and Raman point out, is that those are private sector companies that by virtue of being companies need to scale, want to scale. That's how they see business growth. And so tapping into their expertise and the thinking that they bring can really unlock and propel and accelerate this incredible change in the ecosystem. And these goals, well, I still have a couple more to tell you about. They are interesting in that they are big, right? They are big, bold, audacious initiatives. And like Lalit and Raman had pointed out, it's because Mastercard's a company, and Mastercard's a global company that operates locally and believes that for our business to be successful, we also need to see society be successful, and we need to have communities that are inclusive, because these are, at the end of the day, the people who use the types of products that we provide. So our last two commitments that I wanted to flag for you, one is in response to COVID-19. And so we made, in addition to a number of philanthropic investments around trying to find treatment for COVID, we also made a commitment to make 250 million available in services to small businesses. And this includes everything from cybersecurity to identity protection to business training. And what's interesting about this is that because we're a network of networks, right? We are the rails in which payments are finalized or made, we can see this incredible spike in cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And so when Lalit's talking about the ecosystem that he's building, we also know that the smallest of those karanas need cybersecurity protection, because while the assets and the wealth that they have is small vis-a-vis others, it is incredibly important to them, and they are more and more becoming susceptible to cybersecurity threats. And then the last commitment we had is around investing 500 million in Black communities. And this is really in response to this incredible surge in the United States of people feeling outraged by racial injustice. And while it's primarily focused in the US, this is really how we think about all of the work in all of the countries in which we operate in, and that we are a local corporate citizen and want to be a part of the fabric and the solutions in country. And so while we can bring global expertise and knowledge and experiences, we do think of ourselves as, how do we adapt locally? How do we work with local partners? And how do we think about those ecosystems and being able to play an honest broker role, because Mastercard doesn't sit in either, right? Like, we're not in Lilith's ecosystem, the FMCG, the brand, nor the distributor. And in Raman's ecosystem, we're not the commercial bank that's making the loans, and we're not the mobile technology company. Rather, we're the rails, we're the roads that connect all of those together. And so we see ourselves as having this unique position where we can be a broker, and an honest broker at that. And we've had a number of examples, which later on I'm happy to share with you, of how we've done that in different industries, in different countries, as well as in India.
Thank you very much for that, Alison. Your the leadership that you're showing personally, as well as the organization, is phenomenal. And the work that we are doing around the world with you and others are doing through you, with you, is really setting the standard going forward. So do thank you for being the leading light across the Asia region, but also across globally. The whole team is doing some great work. Wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. All this comes together in a minute, but I'd like sort of one more poll to go out. I know we are sort of at a halfway point on this. Perhaps the organizers could set up the third question now, which is a much more critical question on why is SME lending poor in India, building on what we've just heard, and emerging markets, before we go to the RBL question and ask Anshul to solve all the problems for us. So perhaps the organizers, Arya, could you pop that up?
We'll do that. You can go ahead with the discussion. We'll do it in the meanwhile. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you very much. So, bringing it all together, Alison, you've really painted the picture of the ecosystem coming together, what you're doing, you're creating, you're mobilizing, you are bringing everybody to the same table, you're convening, you're helping make things happen. And not just that, you're actually putting cash where to make it happen. So, as the poll comes through, which is, I think, one of the critical pieces, I was wondering whether, Anshul, you could share your thoughts from the RBL Bank point of view, how you are seeing all this from your vantage point of view, and you are at the forefront of this as well.
Sure, thanks. So just to give a perspective to everyone, while RBL is a 70-year-old bank, in our new avatar, we've been around for approximately 10 years. And one of the key focus areas the bank has been working on from day one has been the inclusion space. And let me say that there has been one wave in India per se when it comes to microfinance and women entrepreneurs. And Alison was talking about globally going after and ensuring that 25 million women entrepreneurs are brought in some way with respect to lending and helping them grow. In some sense, what the microfinance story has done in this country, already around 50 million women are provided credit through various entities. And I think that's the kind of wave which the micro businesses also need. So to give a perspective, we, even as a small bank, lend to approximately 3.5 million women borrowers through approximately 1,000 branches covering 75% of this country, which in some sense is an amalgamation of different countries per se, because Northeast works completely differently from a Tamil Nadu, or Punjab works very different from how Maharashtra works. So in that sense, I think that's the way we look at it. That's one story which has really worked for the industry as well as us. The next one, and probably I can call it the holy grail of micro banking, of micro lending, is how do we crack lending to small mom and pop stores? And that's something which we've been working on. But like all the esteemed speakers were putting it across, this is not a journey which can be completed by one entity or by one part of the ecosystem. It needs to bring everybody together. Everybody needs to play a role in it. And we've already spoken about the fact that how companies like Bizom can ensure that there is alternate data available. Obviously, Raman at Jio Payments Bank can ensure there is data available with respect to the telco side, as well as ensuring that you have transactions happening seamlessly and digitally. And obviously, the work which a foundation brings in with respect to not only academic studies and finding out new ways, but even like Alison was specifically talking about how philanthropic money can help you drive experiments and ensure that even a commercial institution gets involved in it and tries out new things. And if they work, they take it to scale. So in my mind, the next wave, which this country definitely needs, is taking to scale lending to small mom and pop stores. Probably when you can lend to, say, in a country of this size, approximately 20-25 million stores, is when we believe that this journey for this segment is really successful. We've been following an approach where we've been trying to partner and get together and try and deliver to this segment. Pratik, if you could move to the next slide, I can explain that. So basically, let's accept the fact that bank is only one part of the ecosystem. Can the bank reach out to everybody? No. Does the bank have information? No. Is the bank geographically present in every location? No. So how do you actually achieve it? And that's where the role of working with partners comes into play. That's where we believe that coming together with a partner who will provide you, say, for example, a geographic reach, or a partner who provides you incremental data. While the bureaus in this country have become pretty strong and robust, even on the microfinance side, but still there is a lot of, if I may say, customer segments, especially in the small businesses, who do not have a bureau thick file. And it is for those segments that it's critical that all the players in the ecosystem come together, are able to provide information so that you can underwrite seamlessly. Because right now, a lot of work happens physically and through a touch and feel medium. And obviously, COVID has taught us that we really need to find a solution pretty fast of how all this can be done either digitally online or probably digitally offline, and then provide a solution to the MSME. So our approach has been that let's sit together with a partner, get both sides together, what are the strengths of each side, and create a program wherein we together go out and reach to the customer and lend to the end user. So that's been the broad approach. Obviously, it brings in advantages of being able to scale up faster, trying to work out new things. And in some sense, you're not only using your intellectual capacity, you're using the intellectual capacity of 20 or 50 other partners. And I think that has worked well for us. Pratik, let's move to the next slide, please. And I thought while I was going last, I guess I was lucky that we didn't talk about data in the ecosystem per se. And so let me talk about data in the ecosystem. Any point of information which is available through, and we've named some of the partners which are there in India, and there are many more which keep getting added on a regular basis. So I must say a lot of new fintechs which are coming in are who are not even concentrating on per se the lending space. They're able to provide information to us for a bank or a financial institution to assess a small business in a faster way, in a more accurate way, in a way which is as digital as possible. Obviously, what Lalit was talking about, that there needs to be some work which needs to be done at the ground as well to prod, if I may use the word, most of these mom and pop stores to try and see how many of them can digitize their transactions, how many of them use some tools so that information is available digitally. But that's one part of it. I think a lot more can also be done parallelly by creating an ecosystem where different data points, be it their utility bill payments, be it their insurance payments, be it, say, for example, they work with one of the distributors who works with Lalit. We are able to get information on how much they buy, at what frequency they buy. So all those things, I believe, are critical in finally creating something which can help us lend to MSMEs. And I believe that we're in this journey together with everyone, and hope to hear more from everybody and learn here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anshul. You've brought it all together for us, which is great. So now, why don't you take over and run the thing, which is brilliant. Thank you. You've brought it really well together. Thank you. Before we move forward, I think there is an additional and final question on the poll before we get into discussions. If we can actually throw that question up to the audience, which is great, which actually is, What are the alternative sources of data banks should use to establish creditworthiness of the MSMEs? And thank you, Lalit, for suggesting this question to be pushed to the audience. If you could actually share that, that'd be good. We'll come back to the results in a minute. But while we're waiting, perhaps I could go back here, and I'll switch off the screen share in a minute. Actually, I can switch it off now. So we're all on screen, I hope. It's just that we have two parallel systems running, and I've never done the parallel webinar like this before. So apologize for also calling out on the organizers as we move forward, helping us out. So there are a couple of poll results, and I would maybe start here with my panelists, if that's possible. We asked the two questions already. But the question that's been asked is why is SME lending poor in India and other emerging markets? And we asked for three options. Is it due to a lack of initiatives from the bank, inadequate policy framework, or access to alternate sources of data? Bizarrely, all three of them are roughly evenly split. So 30, we have 35, 35, 30. So maybe that sort of is something I'd like to sort of pose to everybody here. There's a lot of discussion we have to have, and we have only half an hour. And if the Q&A that comes to the conversation from the attendees and to the webinar, if you could just post your questions to the organizers on the chat window, that'll be great, and we'll address them as we move forward. But sort of just a broad question here. We've heard from Bizom, Lalit, who's actually built a fantastic business, 700 million people you are touching. It's enormous, right? It's huge in terms of impact through through your sort of work, and that's sort of almost the population of the country, which is quite an interesting outreach that you have. 500 CPG goods. I mean, that's the data you have is huge. That you're actually doing that. Now, in terms of Jio, you are taking the digital first route, which is coming over the air and landing on the app of the users as well. So this is quite of the clients and customers that you're establishing as well. So this is quite an interesting piece. And Jio, you have a big ecosystem through access to that, or potentially to the Reliance ecosystem as well. So you've got a huge footprint through that as well. How could, and here's just throwing the gauntlet down a little bit, how could a Jio work with the Bizom? And we'll bring in the RBL thing and Mastercard in a minute, but just sort of, if you look at the feet on street digitization to Lalit's doing and has done, and here's Jio coming in, what could be, what's different, what could be done together to make it much more sort of integrated? If there is a need to integrate. If there isn't, it's okay. And where I'm going from is a slightly controversial question, which is, do companies prefer vertical integration, bottom up? And I would like to come back to that. But what is in the way? So maybe if you could share your thoughts on, if the two of you were to dance the tango, what would that be? Maybe Lalit, you want to start first from your thoughts?
Sure. Look, so some from outside, obviously, and I think Raman can answer that better. Obviously, one of the ways Jio generally would work with somebody like Bizom is obviously access to the insight, information, and to the reach, right? So far, the whole Jio retail in general has been focused on the own retail, so to say. And I think now they are getting into this whole POS and mom and pop retail. One of the things, obviously, Anshul also mentioned was how Jio could provide an alternate source of data, especially in terms of telecom usage. I mean, that's an interesting point of data to understand creditworthiness of a shopkeeper, right? So there are certain strengths that Jio brings to that whole ecosystem in terms of operational might, in terms of alternate source of data, in terms of overall reach that they provide in whole stuff. Working with a tech and insights platform like Bizom can actually help them access things like larger brands, this entrepreneur ecosystem of distributors. I mean, like I mentioned, Bizom already has about 150,000 entrepreneurs who are doing their business through Bizom. How can they leverage on that to expand their geographic reach faster, so to say? Instead of building all of that infrastructure themselves, how can they leverage on that existing infrastructure that Bizom already connects to get that larger, so to say, or faster reach? But obviously, I mean, one from outside can only wonder, whether Jio wants to do everything by themselves or whether they would like to work with somebody like Bizom. That's something I'm curious to hear from Raman as well.
Okay, so thanks, Lalit, for your introduction. So, as you rightly mentioned, that you're deeply into the solution part, and we can say that as a part of the ecosystem, we are deeply into the scale. So, the moment we have the solution, scale is not a challenge. So, there's a perfect marriage that can happen when there's a solution which the consumer wants, and of course, that is married with a scale. So, then the replication happens very fast. So the only thing that we need to see as a part of the partnership is that what are the complementary relationship that we can build as we go. The areas where one partner is good at and the area another partner is good at. The moment we are able to integrate process-wise and as well as, of course, the technology-wise, that's a perfect marriage. I will say that that's going to sustain for a longer duration.
Yeah, that is absolutely.
Coming back to the synergies, of course.
We seem connected. Give it a couple of seconds.
So data points across the market partner the entire ecosystem. Of course, we to take care of that. Whatever data using internally, externally, we need to ensure that the consent of customer is aware of what we are.
So, Raman, you're breaking up a little bit. Apologies, we lost the last few seconds of this. Perhaps you could sort of just paraphrase and share what you shared. So, the important point you were making there.
So the point we said that so when we get into partnership, we see what are the features and what are the solutions both the partners bring to the table. As I was mentioning earlier, that as long as the solution is available, and the best thing for in the ecosystem here is that we bring scale. The moment we have the perfect solution, we marry with the scale, we are able to reach consumer in no time. So that's the power of platform we are working on. And as Lalit was also saying that there's many businesses within the ecosystem which can be leveraged across to bring synergy among the overall offering which can be offered to the consumers, not only on the demand side, but also on the supply side.
Understood. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And then I'd love to go to Anshul and Alison in a second. Just sort of from your point of view, Anshul, you're clearly a believer in the ecosystem approach. We've talked about, use just a simple case study of Jio, and that's why I started there. Bizom and Jio, how can we collaborate? And not suggesting they would tomorrow, but for example, if we were to do that, from your point of view, you have, helped create personally, as well as also across RBL, a very interesting way of collaborating with various service providers and extension sort of approaches and partners, etc. So if you were to look at this, sort of what were the sort of prerequisites you would see for RBL or yourself personally? If you can flag it, personal opinion, RBL, that's totally fine. All of you are very important large companies, so you can flag your responses appropriately. But if you were to participate in what Bizom and Jio hypothetically may be thinking about doing, how would RBL connect?
So see, we've been on this journey of working with partners for some time now, and I think the first point where both sides need to agree is that if you're both commercial institutions and not a not-for-profit institution, it needs to make commercial sense for both sides. It can't be a one-sided game, because if it's a one-sided game, it'll never go to scale. So I think that's the first thing both sides need to agree. That has to be the starting point, and both sides need to understand that in the initial part of the journey, both sides will sacrifice till you reach a certain level of scale. And I think that is what ensures that success is there, because what we've seen is that if that clarity comes from both sides, and typically most of the fintechs who we work for, I'm using this word, is finally there is one person who's taking a call. It's easier. Banks, there are too many people taking a call, but still, the point is that if the whole thought process or ecosystem accepts this, and we've been able to do that within at least RBL Bank, that get the partner aligned with you with respect to the fact that we are in the journey together. Because if any one of you is, if I may say, losing money or falling by the way, the attention span will go away, the focus will go away, and so will your ability to scale. So I think that's where it starts. The second thing is that one needs to accept the fact that, say, for example, Lalit is a master when it comes to knowing what kind of data is available, what kind of data is accurate, and what kind of data he can bet on. And I'm a master on knowing what kind of a credit frauds happen, or what kind of credit issues happen, and then and that's the best way to come together and build out a solution. And I think a lot of it works when you sit together and discuss this in a lot of detail, down to every minute aspect. A lot of times what we do is we get into a relationship at a high level, and while on the ground the nuts and bolts are not figured out. It's actually critical to figure out the nuts and bolts as well. So one is obviously the thought process around the fact that both need to succeed, and the second is around the fact that you get the nuts and bolts right on day one, as in at least start the process on day one before you reach out to the customer, because you don't want to go out to a customer when you both parties themselves are not clear. And I think in my mind, those are the two things which are most critical, and those are the things which have worked for us as well. And if it scales up, then ensure that I'll use the word profits get shared equally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's well put. And perhaps jumping to Alison quickly, when you look at, from your vantage point, India and other countries, what would your sort of view be on an ecosystem getting getting to an ecosystem at scale? Bringing an outreach and things. And what do you see that's happening in broader region, globally, but also India from your point of view? Could you share some thoughts around that?
Certainly. And before I do, I just wanted to say, I could not agree more with what Anshul said. I think the idea that you're coming at it with eyes wide open, that there's sacrifice in the beginning, but that there is a commitment and a focus to scale is incredibly valuable to setting a partnership. The one thing I would add, or maybe the two things I would add, is first, that the partners to some degree need to be in like-minded. They need to be in agreement about the values that they're looking for, and what that ultimate end goal is. And sometimes it is certainly around the profitability and the commerciality of a project or product, but sometimes it's also about truly the ecosystem and something larger than that. And I think that there needs to be enough space and candidness at the beginning to have those conversations and to set it out in that way. And I think the other thing I would say around how do you think about brokering those partnerships is that there is a unique role for philanthropic money to help prime the pump. And I think, as you have Jio, as you have all three of those institutions talking about the commercials of it, that makes sense. But there's some things. So, for example, if you're not a formal business and you're not registered and you don't have your license, it becomes very difficult to engage in the formal financial system unless you stay at the microfinance level. And so that alone is something that philanthropic money is better suited for, because it simply erodes the profitability or the scalability of a commercial partnership. And so there is a space to start to think about how do you bring those, bring that softer money together, as well as the boots on the ground field staff with confidence and trust of the community and engaging them as well. And I guess to answer your question, Pratik, about where else have we seen this and what have we done? We've partnered around what our Kirana shops, but in Kenya, with a large FMCG company there, and we did it in a way of trying to really build out the digital economy and ensure that both businesses, small business owners, understood how to engage in the digital economy, which is different in Kenya, just because they have quite a large penetration of mobile money. But then we paired it with training because we wanted to make certain that the design and the rollout was really shopkeeper first or shopkeeper centric, right? So how do you make certain that a shopkeeper has the right knowledge as they're making a decision about whether or not it makes sense for them to take out credit? And then as we started to build out that ecosystem, what we found was that there was an incredible amount of profitability. So of shopkeepers that participated, so there's 21,000 shopkeepers that have participated in the program in the last year and a half, 224,000 transactions. The average transaction amount is $33. And so you can see that it is a very small amount. So it's a last mile solution in terms of supporting small micro businesses. But the interesting part is when you layer on the training, we saw profitability increased by 20% for these businesses. So it's the access to finance, the know-how of when to use it, how to use it. And what's been interesting is because we did this through a partnership-based approach, we have now had an insurance company come to us and talk to us about how can we layer on insurance. And from their perspective, they see this as a loss lead, right? They provide small amounts of inventory insurance through the platform, which increases the value proposition for everybody involved. But for their purposes, they are hoping to open a door so they can begin cross-selling for other types of products. But for those micro businesses that are participating, it is incredibly valuable. And it very similar to what Lalit had spoken about, it is taking alternative data sources and working with a commercial bank to help them think differently about their underwriting.
Thank you for sharing that. And you're absolutely right. The catalytic sort of force that philanthropic money is, to create demonstration models is, without it is the importance of that cannot be underestimated for sure.
One thing, sorry, Pratik, one other thing that I would say that's also important is we also have to be very strategic about how do we use that philanthropic money, because if the whole pilot is predicated on, oh, there's a lot of philanthropic money, you'll never be able to get to scale. And so how do you slide it in? How do you slide it out? And how do you know that it can slide out without the whole house collapsing?
You made the point I'm just going to make.
Sorry.
The philanthropic money is catalytic. The catalyzer needs to, has a natural life, right? And then once the catalyzer sort of has done its job, then it needs to take the scale, which is great. But of course, we need to make sure that there is the business model, as Anshu was saying. There, as Raman, you were saying, the access to relevant folks. If I was just sketching out here quickly a simple flow. So if I'm a micro business, and there's a question from the audience, which is what's the definition of the MSME segment? And I think this conversation, I think it is broad. MSME being, maybe Anshul, from your point of view, how do you define MSME before I come to the sketch I was making and explain that?
So if I follow the government definition, the new government definition talks about businesses of various sizes. MSME is actually micro, small, and medium. It goes up to now corporates in the range of up to 200 to 250 crores of turnover. But when specifically I was speaking about, and I think a lot of conversation which is happening here is more focused around the micro and to some extent small, because that's where most of your mom and pop stores or your very small businesses or a small telecom shop or a small repair shop will lie. And I think most of the conversation here has been around that specific segment.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if Lalit, you disagree or agree with that, or you feel you have a broader definition from your point of view, because you're not a regulated institution. So how do you define a micro business?
No, absolutely. I think Anshul hit that part correctly. Government has its own definition. When we look at our particular businesses, if you look at shopkeepers, distributors, wholesalers, that typically go from anything between 10 lakh rupees an annum as a turnover to, maximum 10 crore rupees an annum as a turnover, right? And that's typically, and this is, I'm talking in terms of not manufacturing, but the turnover in terms of trade, that money in trade that.
Understood. Thank you very much. And I think Raman, you'd probably follow the same logic. So we can, yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, so that's quite important that we're talking about micro business in various forms. We're not just talking about only the kirana shops in this conversation, talking about broader as well, but we're using the kirana shops as an example. That brings it to life very quickly. There's lots of micro manufacturers out there, the micro businesses, otherwise service sort of folks, etc. as well provide that. But I was sketching out this thing, and I'm going to come to Raman in a second. Around if you were to look at an ecosystem model, but then step back and say, well, what does the micro business need? The client-centric view. If I'm running a small shop that is now, and I've been shut or shuttered due to the COVID issues around the community for the past 3-4 months, 6 months. I mean, there's a whole financial health issue of people don't have enough money to survive for 3 months or more is a big sort of problem on the world. So if I own a small shop, it's been shuttered. If I were to be brought into this, I would imagine that I need to have an ID, which Aadhaar brings to the table. I hope to have that, but I need to have an ID through which I can be KYC'd. And if I'm KYC'd, I need to be introduced to a platform like, for example, Jio Payments has access connections perhaps to the Jio Mart machine, or it could be, selling online through Flipkart, whatever, right? So sell in a different way. I want to be able to order things differently. I need to then be taught about these things. And I'm sitting far away in a COVID environment. How do I even get to know this if something's happening? How are you reaching out today? Maybe Raman, if this is a question that we can pose to everybody here, but perhaps because you are really pushing this agenda as well, maybe your thoughts there. How do we inform people that this can be done, and how do we educate them?
Okay, so we work very closely with our ecosystem companies. So and even during COVID time and pre-COVID times, our ecosystem companies, they were interacting with many merchants on a B2B side. So coming back to your question on what happens, especially during COVID times when there are many challenges and the constraints being put. So in my opinion, if there's a shop who's facing a challenge, of course, the one thing we all believe that the shop requires a contactless solution from a payments point of view. So which can be a QR code, a UPI based payments, or any other mechanism by which customer of particular shop feels safe that shop accepts that particular payment, so that he need not to have any other mechanism by which there could be a transmission. Number one of the COVID. Second thing, the supply chain was also disrupted during these times. And because of the lockdown 1 to lockdown 5, it has been a stage-wise unlocking that has happened. Shops have faced a lot of issue. Even the supplier wanted to supply material, but because of, I'll say, the lack of infrastructure in terms of transport as well as the labor, goods were not reaching in time. Of course, these were the issues, in fact, the entire industry has faced. So even our merchants also face the same issue. But the good thing that happened, that whatever capacity with the ecosystem we could do, merchants were able to get their supply chains in shape. I'll say, when I say supply chain in shape, is that they were able to offer the necessary SKUs in time, and through the ecosystem, the supply was more or less intact. We work with many local, hyper local players also, which ensured that the minimum supply was available to all the merchants where we were interacting with. These are the two things. And the third thing, of course, was that since now the payment also has to move in a digital format back to the principal/wholesaler or retailer. And the good thing that has happened in our case, Pratik, was that since we were providing the acceptance, so there's a mechanism by which the money can also move back to the supplier digitally. So that solved most of the cases. And fourth, I think the Anshul can also pitch in here, is that during these times, access to capital was the need of the consumer. And of course, our ecosystem, you know how the entire ecosystem works, that supplier gives you 1 week to 10 days of credit. But since the lockdown continued and still continuing, there's a need of a regular supply of capital from these mom and pop stores so that the shop keeps on running.
Thank you. And are you sort of taking additional steps, and perhaps, Lalit and Ananshul, your views as well on, in India, are you, how are you making people aware that this kind of thing can happen, and training and support? And because you can build it, but will they come?
Okay, I'll give you my view, right? So unlike someone like Jio, we don't have our own ecosystem, right? So we have to depend on a third-party ecosystem, which is for us, the brands are third-party, the distributors, wholesalers are third-party, the banks are third-party, and we are just building, in some way, like Mastercard is doing, we are building the digital pathways between all of them. The interesting part about building pathways is that we have to show value to each one of them to go digital. What I mean to say is that when I go to a brand and say, look, you need to now educate your retailer ecosystem to go digital, because I depend on them. I don't have any feet on street, or I don't have any infrastructure to do that. Now I have to, the brand's simple question is going to be, what is in it for me? Now I have to have this value proposition for brands very clear to say, look, you are going to reduce your cost of sales. You're currently sending feet on street, and that's possibly costing you 6 to 8% of your overall transaction volume just in a cost of sales. If you digitally empower them, that cost of sales is going to reduce, and your communication to retailer is going to be now digital, and you can now interact with them far better. You can possibly give them better margins, or give more incentives to retailers, and so on and so forth. That's a value for brands. Then distributors. Now distributors ask me, look, I have a physical infrastructure which I can go and use for delivery. Now, if you need me to now educate the retailers to order from this particular app, what is in it for me? Now, I have to be able to give them a proposition in terms of how it's going to increase their rotations, how can they add more lines, how can they make more margin from the same infrastructure that they have. Similarly, when it comes to banks, the banks say, look, it's great that you have all the data, but look, what is in it for me to give a 10,000 rupees credit to a small shopkeeper, right? Now I say, look, now I go to Anshul and say, look, Anshul, you have this agenda, or you have this mandate to give micro loans, but you are not able to do that because your cost of sales of doing this micro loan in terms of KYC, processing this data, information, insight is going to be too high to actually make you any money for this 10,000 rupees loan and whatever interest rate that you're going to charge. Look, I'm here giving you a way by which I'm going to reduce this cost of KYC and cost of creditworthiness of this particular shopkeeper to minuscule. That makes it viable for you. That gives you a business model to process this 10,000 rupees or 15,000 rupees loan. And that's a similar proposition I would have for anybody who is into the credit mechanism. So for us, this ecosystem approach is eventually about making sure there is value for each of them, because all we have is the digital pathway to connect all of these pieces together. But unless these pieces come together, our digital pathways are not going to scale as fast as they can, and we have to take their help to do this last mile communication any which way.
Yeah, and question to you again back to this is, and how do you educate the retailer network? You have a few million in the network. How do you educate?
If these three guys come together, right, they together themselves have all the infrastructure in the world. So if you ask Raman has access to 30 million shopkeepers. Every guy is selling a Jio SIM card, right? If you ask HUL has access to 5 million odd kiranas that they are serving. A distributor in the place where my office is in Bangalore, Bellandur, the distributor in Bellandur meets this 500 shopkeepers in Bellandur every week for delivering the goods physically, which cannot be avoided, which cannot be done as a contactless delivery any which way. So he's anyway going to deliver. Now, question is, what value is it that I'm giving to him to educate while he's delivering goods, or while HUL is communicating to brands, or while Jio is talking to those shopkeepers? What value is it in for them to also educate them that they can use this tech platform to digitalize their own shops and so on?
Thank you for that. Absolutely. Just looking at the time, we're coming close to the end of the session. It's like reading a good book. You don't want to put it down, right? You just want to keep going. This topic, and each of you have so much to share. It almost feels sad that we are coming to an end of the session, but we'll continue discussions offline, of course. But Alison, from your point of view, when you look at the broader brushstrokes of building an ecosystem, the client centric fee, and I loved Anshul's slide that the micro business is bam in the middle, right? So what are the things you've seen that set into work to bring the micro business along?
Yeah, so we have built a lot of our programming, even programming that Access Development Services is implementing around the idea that learning from a randomized control trial that was done through the London School of Economics that talked about just-in-time messages, right? So you can have product, which is great, but if you don't have the knowledge, some people are very hesitant to use those products. You can have training, but if it's in the absence of a real opportunity to use that training, it feels quite academic, and it doesn't beget the change in behavior that you're really looking for. So what we've been trying to do is how do you pair those together? And what we've done is taken a funnel approach where we say, can you do very simple, actionable training messages and cast that net really wide using digital means? And we do it through a very iconic, unique animated protagonist, in that because we wanted to see it to be something that is endearing, something that people want to watch. Yeah. And so we've done that, and then we layer on in-person trainings, and we enable and empower the shops to say, yes, I want more hand-holding. That was a teaser. That wasn't enough for me to be able to go and implement. I need more support. And so then we actually invest in the face-to-face advisory clinics to be able to provide that support. And so what we're trying to do is to increase where the lowest bar is by lifting that knowledge base and then providing additional services. And we're finding that to be a very effective way to get to scale and to help change where the starting point is.
Thank you for sharing that. Given that we have 4 minutes left, just quickly, perhaps I could go around the table, starting with Anshul and virtual table globally set. With Anshul, and so if you were to share 30 seconds about what are the challenges you see in making something like this happen, and another 30 seconds on, well, actually, this is how you think you can solve one of those challenges or two. And then go around each of you like that, if possible. So with Anshul, gauntlet is thrown. What do you think are the challenges? What do you think could be the solution?
Okay, so I'll split the challenges into 4 parts. One is changing the mindset and behavior of the small business, because the more they go digital, the more they take up new things, it becomes easier and the whole ecosystem flows through. And I think in COVID, they themselves have shown their ability to bring around changes the way most of them have sold on WhatsApp. So I think that's definitely doable. Obviously, it's a slightly long-term journey. The second is around the fact that getting the ecosystem, and I'll split ecosystem into 2 parts. One is ecosystem with respect to what can be done at a policy level, and I think that can bring around a larger scale-based change. And the other is partnership. So on the partnership front, we believe that individual institutions can keep on doing it, and obviously the philanthropic money that helps moves it faster. But I think the ecosystem of overall a central unit dispassionately, or a fair unit providing information across the board, is something which can bring around a larger change. And the last point I think is around per se acceptance of the fact that this needs to be done to bring around a change across the whole economy. Because if you get small businesses running and growing faster, the trickle down effect is so large, and that needs to be seen. And I believe there's a challenge in making everybody understand also, while we keep talking about it and there are papers written in the academic circles, the kind of overreaching and large impact with 30 or 40 million small businesses growing at a faster pace in the whole economy, even from a financial perspective as well as a social perspective, is just too large. And I think that's another thing which needs to be brought out.
Thank you. So thanks for sharing. Now, this is sort of the closing thoughts and comments as we are. Perhaps, Raman, you could share sort of one challenge, one sort of solution in making this real.
So, Pratik, while we all acknowledge that platforms are there, so I couldn't agree more with Anshul that the mindset has to change. And of course, in the BC business, I'll say, there will be a shared findings that if father is not willing to do that business, the kid will be willing to do that business. It need not to be. I'm saying the kid above 18 years of age. So that's an aspiration, and that basically brings a reputation to the shop that you have become a trusted banker to the consumer. The second thing is a lot of work needs to happen between a small kirana store, uh, mom and pop store, and the consumer side. How this kirana store engages with the consumer. So how a kirana store connects with the consumer. So that's the area where work has to happen, so that the consumer comes to, and the platforms need to enable that. The consumer should come back to the same merchant again and again for the repeat orders. In the same time, merchant also caters to the requirement which consumer is asking for, so that there's an engagement on a more frequent basis. That is the need of the commerce. As long as this need of the commerce is taken care of, that the business will keep on going.
Thank you, Raman. I know we had time, but Lalit, what are your sort of closing thoughts on one challenge, one barrier? You've shared some challenges already, but if you could wrap it up.
Okay, I'm going to be very short about this. Look, I think the whole behavior change at the shopkeeper end is something we are driving any which way. I think we need more banks really to cut checks in a strategic way, not as an experiment, not as a pilot, not as anything else. I think that's my biggest problem, is that the banks are not doing that in a more consorted way. I'm here to find all the solutions in terms of business models around that, in terms of reducing cost of ownership and stuff like that. I think that's I think, I mean, all three of us here, Anshul, Raman, and Alison, being from the financial industry. I mean, that's I think the solution is right here. I mean, anyone or all three of them decide that they want to strategically take this credit to, shopkeepers as a thing. I have the rest of the behavior change and other data points with us to kind of help them cut those checks.
Thank you. Spoken like a true entrepreneur, which is great. Wonderful. Thank you. Alison, I know we're over time, but maybe a sentence or two.
Yep, absolutely. So I think that the biggest challenge, looking at it from the perspective of the micro businesses, is how do they get access to these networks? How do they get access to the network, the financial services, to the larger brands, to the distributors? And I think that the solution is for those of us who are the larger players in those ecosystems to think about how we can lend our credibility and our connections to help to string the thread through all those, because I think that at the end of the day, the partnership building really is a concerted consensus effort.
Thank you very much. I do want to say, thank you to each of you taking time out. We thought 90 minutes, it just flew past. Right? So it is really, really good to have all of you here talking about a solution and actually saying, look, this is how we can help overcome it. And we look forward to following up with each of you and saying, look, can we do something? Which is great. To Lalit's point, to Raman's point, to Anshul, and each of you have said we can do it. So let's try and let's do it. Let's build on what you already have. And I want to thank deeply as well, Vipin, Radhika, Arya, Priya, Gautam, everybody, the team and Access who really pulled this together and actually made it interactive. We weren't able to get all the questions that are coming through, but there are about 200 people online right now watching this and actually sharing their thoughts and concerns. So each of us hopefully have stepped away from this conversation knowing a bit more and coming up with a bigger solution for us. So thank you very much, and do stay safe, each of you, and look after yourselves and the ones around you and the ones you love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.